So while people are slowly getting in, thank you so much for joining us today. To those online, I don't know if you're in the afternoon or in the morning. It's a tricky part of the day in that sense. So today we have a workshop on planning for publications, which is part of the MENA Social Policy Network Early Career Research Initiative. My name is Tamara Cole, and together with Noor Alabas, I am we're the early career research representatives of this initiative, and we've been organizing roundtables and also mentoring sessions. So for today's session, we will be joined by Raimundo Soto, who is the managing editor at the Middle East Development Journal. Furthermore, he is the Associate Professor of Economics at Pontificia Universidad Católica de Chile. I hope I pronounce it correctly or somewhat in the right way. He has published extensively on long-run growth, resource curves, fiscal policy institutions, and political conflict. And his latest book, Aftershock of the Arab Uprising, Reconstruction, National Peace and Democratic Change, will be published by Routledge in the coming months. And we also are very pleased to welcome Daniel Matter, who is the senior editor for original reference titles at Elgar Publishing. And he's responsible for overseeing Elgar's renowned research handbook and encyclopedia programs in the social sciences. In addition to this, Daniel is also responsible for commissioning titles within Elgar's sociology list. So we're very pleased to have representatives from both more the book publication as well as the journals with us today. So for today's session, we will have a short presentation by the respective publishers, where they will introduce themselves, their journal or publishing company, and the publication process. After this, we will have a moderated roundtable, and then we will open the floor to all of you, so you can also ask any of your questions. Feel free to use the little hand icon or put your question in the chat box. And this could be either in English or Arabic. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Raimundo Soto to briefly introduce us to the Middle East Development Journal. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Tamara and the organizers. I have to do this very quickly, if I can, sure. Can you see it now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to this workshop. I am the managing editor of the Middle East Development Journal, and I'll introduce you first to the journal, and then I'll go quickly about the criteria for publishing, for selecting papers to be published. Okay. This is the Middle East Development Journal. When we used to print it, it's no longer being printed. Everything is online and electronic. But this is the cover page for the journal. It's a publication of the Economic Research Forum, a think tank based in Cairo, but with a regional reach and scope. It's currently being published by Taylor and Francis. It focuses on the MENA region, and in three fields: development economics, general economics, and political science. We think that these three areas of research cover a lot of what is really important in the MENA region, and we are relatively flexible to include a number of topics under the umbrella of development, political science, and general economics. The journal has been running for around 13 years. I am on my second year as a managing editor. I've been also, my papers have also been published early on in this journal. Currently, the readership is around 4,000 institutions in the MENA region, and another 10,000 institutions are given the opportunity in low-income countries to access the journal as well as other journals for free. Okay, so if you think about the reach of the journal, it is around 14,000 institutions, and the number of researchers that have access to the journal is, of course, far larger. We issue 2 issues per year, one in June and one in December. Each of these issues have 9 articles in it, more or less. So think about 18 articles per year. Submissions in 2021 went up to 115. The usual number used to be around 55, 60, but last year it's been incredible, the number of submissions, which are handled by me and 4 associate editors. And last year, I rejected around half of the papers after first reading. And it's my job as a managing editor to desk reject whatever I think it's not up to par. Around 40 papers were then rejected after first refereeing. It was sent to referees, referees turned in their referee reports, and they were saying, look, this is not very good. It's not worth the effort of trying to make of this a publishable paper. The rest are in revise and resubmit, second round revise and resubmit, or being produced, which is to say they were sent to the to Routledge to be put in the form of an article that can be read by our subscribers. Okay. Papers are submitted directly by authors. We seldom invite any kind of paper. Submission is free. The manager editor then decides, which is me, I decide whether to reject it, usually because of 3 things. One is that it's out of scope. It's low value added, which means that there is nothing really new in terms of methodology or conclusions or a new data set or whatever, or because papers are cheating, which are copies of other papers that are already being published, or papers that have been sent to more than one journal at the same time. If the paper is not rejected, I send it to the associate editor, which is going to be the handler of the paper for the rest of the process. And sometimes I handle myself papers, but I don't try to do it very often, but sometimes it's necessary for me to do that. When the paper is not rejected by me, the handler, either me or my 4 associate editors, send it to refereeing. The refereeing is double-blinded. Whoever submitted the paper don't know who is refereeing, and the referee does not know who submitted the paper. We look for 3 or more of these referees, but the acceptance to review our papers is relatively low, and the quality is relatively heterogeneous because we don't pay for referees. We don't ask we ask the referees to do it for free. It's a public service that we do and they do, but this implies that since we're not paying for the refereeing report, then not very many referees would like to work for us. Upon receiving the referee reports, usually it takes around 60 days. The paper is either accepted as is, I haven't seen it yet, but it's possible. Paper is sent to revise and resubmit, or the paper is directly rejected. Once the papers have accepted, they are sent to production, usually in the form of files in Word, Excel, or TIFF for diagrams. The publishing house will have an English editor, which takes care of the written version, typesetting, reference check. The article is designed. It sends back to the authors for correction, very minor additions, some proofreading and checking the equations and the like. And when it is finished, they are issued online on our web page individually. And the dissemination process starts, and there are a number of different venues and channels through which the paper is disseminated. Once a semester, we collect these articles in an issue, and all the papers are put together and in an issue, and this is formatted for printing. We are not printing any more copies, except for I think 4 or 5 of our subscribers that do require a printed copy, but we will no longer do that. What are the criteria for qualifying papers? And this is the key issue for us. First, originality of content. Either it's a new topic or an interesting variation of a topic, a new methodology or an improvement upon previous methodology, or new results that challenge either our previous knowledge in terms of empirical content, or a new theory, or new results for policies. The second criterion is to have is that the paper must be relevant, either at the regional level, for emerging economies, for policies that have been undertaken in the wrong way, whatever, but it must be relevant. The third one is that it must reach conclusions of interest to the readership. This is not a niche journal in which few people in a topic can discuss whatever they're working on. This is for general audiences, so it must have conclusions that appeal to a broad base of readers. And the fourth one, the paper must be really written properly, clear, concise, dead on, and well documented. I was asked to say what are the do's and the don'ts, and I'm going to concentrate on the don'ts for those researchers which are starting to enter this business of publishing research. The first one, don't write a novel. Mysteries are very good for books and for movies, and awfully bad for publishing research. Start with the conclusions. We don't want to read 40 pages to find out what is the contribution of the paper. Second one, don't wonder. The time invested by the reader in your paper is far more valuable than yours. So please don't wonder, go straight to the point. Okay? Third one, don't state the obvious. The reader is smart. He or she can read, he or she can process information, so don't describe a diagram, don't describe a table. We can read the results, just point out which is important. Whatever it is, say what it is. Don't be sloppy, because the reader will stop reading whenever he or she finds a mistake, an obvious mistake, right? And the last one, it's don't mess around. One idea per sentence, not two, not commas in it. One idea per sentence, and all ideas which belong to a same group are collected in one paragraph. I don't want to, as a reader, I don't want to have to go through all the papers to figure out where is important information. Just give it to me, okay? And that is what I look as a managing editor in a paper with no mysteries, that goes straight to the point, that is concise, that is well documented, and that identifies clearly what are the contributions of that research. And that's it, because my time is up.
Great. Many thanks for this very concise and direct to the point presentation. So I will give the floor now to Daniel Mattert.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. And yeah, that was a great presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm now going to share my screen for mine. Sorry guys, it was working 5 minutes before the presentation. Tamara, would you mind sharing the presentation on your end if possible?
No problem whatsoever. One moment, please. There we go. So I will open it here. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, nice to meet everyone. So I'm Daniel. As Tamara said, I'm an editor at Edward Elgar Publishing, and I've been working here for coming up on 4 years now, which is slightly scary. And obviously, I'm going to talk about the book publishing process. There are definitely some similarities with the journal publishing process. I think what I'm going to talk about does apply primarily to Edward Elgar as a company, but a lot of the things I talk about will be very, very relevant for other publishers as well, if you're looking to approach them. So I guess if I kind of walk through the presentation, because I have quite a lot of slides. The first couple are just very kind of introductory slides. The third one gives a very quick introduction to Edward Elgar. So we were founded in 1986. We now publish around 400 books a year across our key subject areas, which are law, business and management, and the social sciences. And our ethos is very much to be a very author-friendly publisher. So we pride ourselves on making fast decisions. We keep all of our production processes based within the UK, which we think helps to create the most author-friendly service possible. And we pride ourselves on our international marketing. Obviously, these days with so many books being published by so many different publishers, it's very important to have that international reach. And so that is certainly something we look to push for. There's a little note there about the kind of books we specialize in. So obviously we specialize in your kind of standard research monograph. We specialize in reference books, which are our handbooks and encyclopedias, and in upper level textbooks as well. I guess a point of comparison between us and maybe some other publishers like Routledge or Oxford is we don't focus so much on the undergraduate market. We do pitch ourselves at a kind of postgraduate and above level. So I guess you might have thought, oh, I'd like to write a book. This is obviously a pretty massive step because books are, I guess, far longer and more comprehensive than an average journal article. The only thing you might have worked on before that's of a comparable extent would be naturally a PhD. And indeed, we have turned PhDs into books in the past, but we think that a PhD is more of a kind of a starting point as opposed to something that can be a book. So if you already have a specific in mind, that's great. If you don't have a specific idea in mind, it's very much worth looking at the market as it is. You can look at the relevant kind of subject sections on our website or on any publisher's websites to see if the ideas that you have already been covered in one format or another. You can think about books that you've read at some time in the past. Are they interesting? Did you enjoy them? Would you like to write something similar? And you can think about the audience. This is very, very important. I think some academics will begin writing books and think that they will reach a kind of very general audience. Books that do this are very, very rare. The overwhelming majority of academic books do only reach an academic audience, so to speak. I guess that affects how the book is written and what sort of level of writing is used. Publishers are far more likely to take on books if they present new research, much like Raimundo said about journal articles. So that's definitely something worth considering as well. And yeah, that's our kind of mission statement for this at the end there. Be ambitious, write the book you want to read. We find that our book projects are far more effective when people actively enjoy working on them. You'd be amazed how many fall apart, not for that reason. So yeah, I think that's something to definitely keep remembering as and when you move forward with a book project. That point at the end as well. Sorry, that last point at the end about think about whether you actually want to write a book is so important at the moment with so many researchers coming into the kind of publish or perish mindset. Certainly early in careers, articles are often preferred by researchers, and we recognize that, which is why a book is very much a longer term time commitment. I mean, certainly when we prepare contracts for books, we often recommend 2+ year time frame for something like this, which I think is always worth considering. I've put a quick note in on edited books as well. They're obviously a little bit broader and more comprehensive, whereas an authored book would obviously just be written by one person. These would have groups of contributors. They can have just as much or if not more impact as authored books if they're done well. And I think the if they're done well is the key point there. They require less actual writing for the editor. Usually an editor for one of our edited books would only write an introduction and maybe one other chapter, but they do require an awful lot more project management in terms of keeping contributors on track. And I mean, obviously a lot of authors will maybe turn to edited books later in their academic career, but I did think that it'd be worth bringing these up, and we've got some nice examples of recent edited books that we've done in this sort of field recently. So when you're looking for a publisher, I think there's a few kind of key points to consider. So the top one is quite important. Have they already published books that you've personally read? Publishers obviously sell themselves a reputation, and books sell themselves a reputation. So if you've read other titles in the area, say all by Elgar or Routledge or so on, and you'd like to associate yourself with that list, that could be a very kind of useful way of choosing a particular publisher. So things you'll want to look for, such as how long will the review process take? Some publishers will conduct a review process at proposal stage, whereas some might review final manuscripts. How long is the production process? And that seems to vary quite widely from publisher to publisher. For just purely for context, our production process takes about 7 to 8 months from the receipt of a manuscript to publication. Will they make an ebook available? Do they have an online platform? Naturally, especially post-COVID, people are consuming ebooks more than ever. I mean, we found actually that our ebook sales have overtaken our print book sales during the pandemic. So that's certainly worth considering in terms of dissemination. And then other things that might be important to you, such as I said, timeline for the project. Can the publisher market your book sufficiently broadly? How much does it cost? That's obviously incredibly important. And it would be worth speaking with colleagues in the area to see if they have any first-hand experience of working with various publishers, because they will inevitably know the reputations and how difficult or easy they are to work with. Go to the next.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. Perfect. So in terms of preparing a proposal for the book, this will always be the first stage for a process. It's incredibly rare that a publisher would sign up a book by an author that they've never worked before without one. So most publishers will have proposal form templates available on their website, and they do appreciate it if you use this form. And the more information that you can fill in on a proposal form, the better. If you have written sample chapters, that's better still. You want to give the publisher as much information as possible to help them make a decision about whether to publish the book or not. Now, we have, I guess, basic subject knowledge of the area, and we'll obviously pick pieces up through discussions with academics, but we're not experts in every single area. So we'd encourage the writing and the proposal to be simple and to the point. I would really emphasize what is new, what your book would bring that others have not. And it's important to identify the audience and explain, well, they'll be interested, because naturally publishers will want to sell the book and they will want it to reach as broad an audience as possible. So the proposal is for the obviously the commissioning editor at the publisher and also the external reviewers. And they will be looking at different aspects. So the commissioning editor will be looking at originality and how the book would fit in with the existing list at the publisher, whereas the reviewers will be looking more at how the book will fit in with the field of research that they've contributed to. So let's say that the publisher has accepted the proposal, which would obviously be fantastic news. They would then proceed with a contract for the book, and then the actual writing process would be underway. Now, every publisher has in-depth guidelines on the website about how these should be prepared, and I would really rigorously follow those, because it will make the final production process much easier. Certainly key issues that we come across when we're dealing with manuscripts, copyright is a big one. It is as it says there, the number one cause of delays to our publication process is finding figures that have been reproduced from other articles without the required permission having been secured. The word limit is also very important. Obviously, publishers want to keep the cost of production under control, which means the book needs to fit within a kind of predefined word count. So you might want to write 500,000 words on a topic, but the publisher probably doesn't want you to write that, because that would be an absolutely massive book. So it is important to ensure that you're concise and that the book fits within that predetermined word count. And then I've got a little point at the end there about abstracts and keywords. That's key for us. Obviously, every publisher will treat that differently. But that's all part of the overall dissemination of the book. We need abstracts and keywords for all of our chapters to ensure that they appear prominently on citation indices like Google Scholar, which is obviously huge for dissemination at the moment. So every publisher will have their own guidelines in that regards, and it's always worth keeping that in mind. This is a brief outline of our production process. Obviously, other publishers might do things slightly differently, but I'd imagine it's pretty similar. So we would check through the manuscript to flag up anything problematic. We give every manuscript we receive a full proofread, copy edit, and grammar check. We do accept very minor changes to the manuscript at this stage. And we would consult the author over the blurb to appear on the back of the book, the cover on the front, and also any endorsements, because quite often authors will like to reach out to senior colleagues in the field to provide quotes to promote the book. We find that's always quite a fun process. Authors like having input about what sort of cover they'd like to see. And then there's that one line at the end there. Yes, we publish all of our books simultaneously in hardback and online as an ebook, which we think is the best possible result for getting it, again, disseminated as widely as possible. And then once the book is published, we will obviously market it internationally, as I suggested earlier. We'll contact relevant journals and blogs and send review copies. We find reviews are a very helpful way of getting our books promoted more widely. If they can be reviewed in a journal, then obviously that will reach a much wider readership, which is always fantastic from our perspective and from the author's perspective as well. And I've just listed some of the kind of marketing efforts we use there. I think the two middle ones there, online discoverability and social media, are probably the most important at the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to start going out to conferences again this year. It's been quite a long time since the last time we went to one of those, but that's also a very useful way for promoting books and allowing people to kind of see these titles in person and spread kind of word of mouth about how good they are. Just a couple of resources there that you might find useful. We've got a section on tips for getting published on our blog, and we've got a series of books called how-tos, which give advice about every stage of the publishing process. There's a couple there. What about keeping your research project on track, and what about enhancing your research? All of those books are available in paperback, and yeah, hopefully they could be an interesting read if you're looking to move forwards with this side of things. And that's the next part of the workshop today.
Great, thank you so much. And for the people at home, I will shortly also upload the link in the chat box so that you have that as well. Now, before I open the floor, I would like to thank both of you for your presentation and showcasing also the publication process for the respective journal and publisher. Now, you mentioned several do's and don'ts. Now, I was wondering what for you is really a key do that authors should take into consideration in that sense. Maybe I can first ask Raimundo and then Daniel can follow up. Is that okay?
Sure, no problem. I think the main issue it's different for a book than for a journal article. A book has a different scope, a different audience. A journal is slightly more specialized because journals tend to specialize even when it is of general interest. I think the main issue for a journal is to have one key identifiable contribution to the discussion, whether it is on a new issue that has not been discussed and it's important and relevant, a new methodology that can be used elsewhere and have general appeal, or a conclusion that challenges us either in our previous knowledge or identifying a topic that has not been addressed. That I will think originality and relevance, that's what I put it in my presentation, but it has to be a new thing. Articles in journals tend to get published much faster than books. And even though a lot of the research is actually disseminated in the form of working papers, the journal gives it some kind of proof of quality because it has been referenced and it has been reviewed and it has been checked. When it gets to the point of being an article published in a reasonably good journal, you get some sort of certification of quality. Therefore, the contribution is slightly certified. Okay, that is the key issue. With books, and Daniel can prove me wrong on this, with books, you need a far wider audience. So the challenges are slightly different than for an article being sent to a journal.
Yeah, that's completely correct. I mean, I think in terms of proposals we receive, if we're going to reject them, it's usually because the book is too specialized. Either it focuses maybe only on one subject, or maybe it focuses only on one country. I mean, we like our books to be quite international. We would very rarely commission a book if it only focused on one country. So for that reason, I think a comparative approach is always a very effective one when it comes to developing proposals, looking at a number of different countries or jurisdictions. So that's the main thing I'd emphasize, that they are kind of sufficiently broad, and that they cover a kind of broad swathe of the field and do take that very international approach.
No, that makes it also very clear in that sense. Now, I would like to pick up on something that was mentioned, that's also the time of process. Now, we know that, of course, with journal articles, you have working paper outlets, of course, but then the question is, how long would the typical process be to get from submitting the first draft all the way until publication? Typically be with the Middle East Development Journal, and if you go for a book process, how long? What would be the typical turnaround? You mentioned the production process is 6 to 7 months, but there isn't a whole stage before that as well. So I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Which one first? I'll go first. A good paper, in the sense that it's clearly written and that the message comes through very easy, shouldn't take very long. A good article for me as a managing editor, if I can read it clearly, I now know who do I have to send it for reviewing. A messy paper is really very difficult to figure out who to send it, right? So a good paper will probably have a reviewing process that is no longer than 60 days. Okay, between submission and getting the first reviewing of the paper. Then, once you send the paper back to the author, if the author take a week, then we go to the second round very quickly, right? But if the author takes 6 months, in reviewing the paper, it's up to the author how long the process will take. In general, people are very keen to publish fast, so they will resubmit the paper very, very quickly, and if the corrections are right, then it goes into production. Okay, it takes, once the paper is accepted, it takes maybe 15 days to have it online, no more than that, given that the paper is already in good shape. Now, if the paper is poorly written, the reviewers will take longer in reviewing the paper, right? And the author will have to do a lot of changes, and the process lengthens significantly. After, say, 6 months, if the paper is not out, I might ask the author to withdraw the paper, okay? Because it takes too long. And articles like milk, they get spoiled after a while, right? It's no longer new, it's no longer interesting, it's no longer a relevant topic, right? Even if I'm not running for having controversial stuff in the minute out, even if that's not the issue with the paper, a paper where the data is 3 years old or 5 years old is no longer very interesting, right? And the chances that are high that this same topic is being covered elsewhere. So I rather have it out as fast as possible. Now, the authors have a lot to say about the speed at which you publish, okay? So I would say that maybe 6 months after being sent, either the paper is out or is gone. That's my take on this.
The book process is naturally quite a bit slower than that. So I think to break it down step by step, upon receiving the initial proposal, we would send it out for an external review, and we try to get reviewers' comments back within 3 to 4 weeks, I think. And then we would either encourage the author to make changes to the proposal based on the reviewers' comments. Sometimes we can move forward with the contract at that point. More commonly, that the author will write a response to the reviewers, and then we'll make the decision of whether to publish it or not based on that. And I mean, I would say the majority of maybe single-authored monograph books tend to take probably in the region of 18 months to complete. Obviously, we're pretty flexible on deadlines, so if authors do ever think that they will need an extension during that process, we're always happy to grant one. But I would say 18 months to 2 years is the typical time frame for writing a book. Edited books inevitably take longer because there's the kind of more project management, chasing contributors, that sort of things. So they're probably more likely to take 2.5, maybe even 3 years. And naturally that time frame will increase as if it's a larger edited book like one of our handbooks. But yes, I would assume around 18 months for a monograph, and then as I said earlier, from the receipt of the manuscript to the final publication, we would assume 7 to 8 months. So I think in total for a monograph you'd be looking at probably in the region of 2 years, even from submitting a proposal to us to final publication. But again, that is very much dependent on the author. Some authors write incredibly quickly, and so that time frame is condensed.
No, okay, great. That clarifies quite a bit. And indeed, one of the challenges that I could also see is that particularly if a book or an article, as also Raimundo pointed out, like sometimes you have an entire debate going on and there is a lot of being published around the same time while you're also developing it. I could imagine that also complicates things. And maybe to tie in a question that I saw popping up also in the chat is to what extent can also a manuscript differ from what was initially proposed, whether this is even a journal article where you say, okay, the article itself has a lot of relevance but requires some work, or if in terms of the book as well, when the book slightly differs due to changes that are also ongoing within the academic debate.
I'll go first again. For articles, I would say that the original subscription or the manuscripts being sent to us, one of the main things that we ask the author is to shorten the paper. And the reason is that authors tend to think that they have to explain everything. And a lot of the time, it's not necessary. When you refocus the paper into what is the contribution, a lot of the things that are around the paper are secondary or superfluous. Okay, so shortening is one main change that we ask authors. And we point out exactly what to shorten the paper. That's one thing. The second thing is that, for example, during the COVID pandemic, a lot of the changes to papers were to take into account what was going on with COVID, when the paper was not exactly on that topic. But that would be a minor addition. It's just basically saying, look, we know that this is going on, so our conclusions should be taken with a pinch of salt, in the sense that it might be the case that COVID will change things, something like around that. Or we know that there is a project on something that might challenge our results. But that are minor additions. I would say that most of what we do is focusing the paper, shortening the paper, and the second area is make sure that you're referencing your work properly in the literature. Okay, so you forgot this piece of work which is crucial, you have to add it. Okay, that's typical for articles, for journals.
Yeah, I mean, and for books, I think that it is definitely not unusual for the kind of precise content of a book to change between the acceptance of a proposal and the delivery of the final manuscript. I mean, COVID is a very good case study of this. I mean, we've seen so many books that were commissioned in maybe 2018 and 2019. We're receiving the manuscript for these now, and they might have added 3 or 4 chapters on COVID that were never present in the initial proposal, but it's made such a huge impact on the literature that it can't be ignored. It has to be covered. I imagine we'll now see a very similar phenomenon in that we'll start getting manuscripts with chapters on the current war in Ukraine. Again, it just cannot be ignored. I mean, so some books will stick more tightly to the proposal than others. I think that's naturally dependent on what the proposal was and what subjects the book are covering. But we're certainly happy for authors to embrace flexibility. We don't want them to kind of be completely prescriptive in having to prepare the manuscript that they first proposed 2-3 years ago. So there is definitely an element of flexibility there.
Okay, no, great. And then one other question that came to my mind is, both of you mentioned, of course, the fact that it goes through a review process. Now, when it comes to the selection of the handlers and also the reviewers, how are these determined? Like, for example, I know some journals tend to ask for potential suggestions. Others assign someone already that is within the network. And similarly, of course, for the books, like, how do you determine which reviewers to send it to?
Well, it's like you said, what we do is basically look for an expert on the topic with previous publications in good journals. Okay, that's basically the type of referee that we would like to have. Now, because the refereeing process for articles is not being paid, you need a good number of these guys, right? So maybe 4 or 5, because you know up front that some of them are going to refuse to do it. But when they refuse, they usually suggest another name. Okay, so it's a process that evolves in time. The second thing is that we have a database of good reviewers and bad reviewers. So I avoid sending the paper to a reviewer that will never answer, or that will turn in a referee report that is useless for the managing editor. Basically because it was done without the adequate quality, or without care, or it took too long, whatever. So I have a black list of people that will not send the paper. I have a white list of people that I would like to have the paper being reviewed. And then I will go through the references of the paper to figure out related papers and ask those authors to read this manuscript, because they are in the field and they know what they're talking about, right? So beyond the typical reference of a Nobel Prize winner, I will move aside and focus on those people working exactly in the topic, and will contact them. And that is a way to ensure that we have good reviews and people working in the field reviewing the article. Now, sometimes articles are very wild, and it gets really difficult to find a good referee, because they're mixing two literatures or three literatures which are totally unrelated, and it gets very complicated. But those papers tend to be very interesting also, because they mix different literatures and therefore make it for an interesting article. If that is the case, I would probably try to find a friend of mine, okay, in the academic world, a friend of mine. I would say, look, this is a very complicated paper to referee. Can you just give me pointers to see what to do with this paper? If it's holding water, I'll keep it. If these so-called friends tell me, no, look, this is too wild a paper, it won't make it for your reference, for your readership, then I'll drop it and suggest another journal for that paper to the author.
Yeah, I think our approach to finding reviewers is not dissimilar. I mean, firstly, there is a section on our proposal form for the author to actually suggest reviewers, and we will always reach out to those reviewers in the first instance. Then beyond that, I mean, quite a lot of our books will go into various series that we have, and those series will have kind of long-established series editors. So we would send the manuscript or proposal to the series editors, and they could review. And then if it's not going to series, if it's just a standalone manuscript, we will do research. We will look at. I think we would particularly prioritize people who've published other books in the area, maybe for us or for other publishers. Or if that fails, then we will look at people who've published recent well-cited journal articles in the area, or members of journal editorial boards. Again, all very relevant to the subject of the proposal, and we would reach out to these people and ask them for their thoughts. I think usually for a proposal, we would try and reach out to at least 6 or 7 reviewers if possible. And I mean, from that, we would hopefully we'd get as many as 3 or 4 reviews. If not, we would keep reaching out until we do have that many, and then we would base our decision to publish based on the comments that we receive.
Okay, no, great. That is very helpful. Just one other, I mean, with the book, of course, it makes a little bit more sense that you reach out before you start. I'm just wondering, in terms of the journals, and I'm sorry, this is a more journal-related question, but would you advise authors to contact the managing editor just to check if the article might be a good fit, or if they already need to start a process or think of publishing it elsewhere beforehand? Or would you say, actually, no, don't write to the journals to check if this article would be a fit, could be a potential fit here, submit it, and then we'll take it from there?
It's a very complicated question. It's complicated because it depends on the number of articles the journal receives. I am getting 1 article every 2 days. If you ask me to also read emails from potential authors asking me, I would say probably don't do it. You're overloading the managing editor of the journal, which has to decide whether to answer your email or just look at the paper. I rather look at the paper, right? Now, because we have this policy of just rejecting whatever we think it's not going to fit in the journal, you will receive an answer within less than a week, right? Saying, look, this is out of scope, or this journal, I would suggest this other journal, which is more interesting for your paper. But in journals where you don't, which are more specialized, and you don't receive this many papers, I would suggest contacting the editor first. The basic issue is that for the author, the publishing time takes too long, right? So if you're an author and you submit your paper, and it will take 6 months to figure out if the paper is going to be published or not. And if you think about the acceptance rate of my journal, which is less than 10%, okay, 120 articles and only 18 published, it gives you like a 10% chance of being published in the journal. Then you don't want to wait 6 or 8 months to figure it out with a 90% probability that your paper is going to be rejected, right? So in that case, I would think that it's better to contact the journal manager and say, look, I have this paper, do I send it or not? In my case, please don't do it, because I have one too many papers to review for the best rejection process. And also because answering emails takes too long, right? So I don't know if it's kind of a yes and no answer. And do it, but chances are you're not going to get a reply. And that's my take on this. I received some emails, but I rather have the paper to look at it. Quite quickly, I can say if it's for the journal or not.
Okay, no, but that is very clear. And I think I can twist it a little bit to also make it fit more the publication, the publisher in that sense, because with the publisher, would you say then you prefer to have the template filled out with the full proposal, or would you also say actually it's okay to email in advance just to check before, and then we can say whether it could actually fit with Elgar or whether you would need to go elsewhere?
Yeah, I think we would always encourage people to reach out at as an early a stage as possible to discuss ideas. We would certainly be, so as long as you could send over a kind of generic framework for a book idea, we would always be able to offer comments at that point and say whether we think it would be a good fit for our list or whether it would be a better fit for another publisher, definitely. So yeah, I would certainly encourage people to write at that stage.
Okay, no, perfect. But then with this, I would like to also open the floor to the participants here and just to see if they have any questions that they would like to ask. If so, please feel free also to use your hand icon or just put your question in the chat box. I can give the floor to you. Maybe first I can ask the question that Noor has asked in the chat box. She has a question for Daniel. She was wondering if you could elaborate more on the points mentioned in one of your slides. Less writing, but more project management. She would imagine that writing a book is more about the content, and writing in general tends to be a messy process. So she was wondering if you could clarify this part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that refers to obviously our edited books. Naturally, with an edited book, the proportion of actual text written by the editor will be much smaller than for an authored book. Because an edited book will have many contributors, and the project management side of it is definitely coordinating the contributors to ensure that everyone delivers their chapters on time and to a sufficiently high standard. Obviously, there's project management involved in planning and writing an authored book as well, but I think we found over the years that edited books definitely require a kind of different level of organizational skill. I mean, everyone knows the phrase herding cats, and that definitely definitely comes into play with an edited book when you're dealing with a large number of contributors from kind of around the world.
No, okay, great. Thanks for the response. I'm just looking if someone else has a question.
Can I add a little?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Two things. One thing is that journals do tend to publish papers on a topic. So you can suggest the editor, for example, a special edition of the journal, special issue, on, say, for example, the impact of COVID in MENA. Right, that could be acceptable, and we do process that kind of thing. And Daniel's point of project management in that case complicates a little, because when you have related articles within an issue, you don't want to have repetition of the same thing being said in 8 articles, the same as in a book. You don't want to have repetitions in 8 chapters, right? So there is some issue of project management when you have a special issue on a topic. That's one thing that you have to take into account. On the other hand, if the 8 chapters in this special issue are good, then the managing editor will be very happy to have the 8 articles being submitted at once as a special project, right? Because it's going to be read and cited more frequently than individual chapters usually, right? Because once you start reviewing, for example, COVID in the MENA region, then people will most likely read 4 or 5 articles within the same issue, and then the citing is going to go up. And this is one thing that the managing editor has in mind. The second issue, which we have not discussed, is publishing costs and fees. So our journal is free. If you submit, it's free. Now, the publishing houses, and maybe Daniel can give us more light on this, have 2 policies. One is that you send the paper as a standard thing. The second one is you would require open access, in which case the author has to pay, but the paper will be available for everyone, not only those who are subscribing. So one thing that would be important for the managing editor, when you submit your paper, in the letter say, look, if the paper is published, we would like to have it open access or not. Okay, that makes some difference, because an open access article has more readership and more citations typically than a paper that is only available to subscribers. Okay, so that is a second issue that the author must take into account when sending it to a journal. Now, open access is expensive, but a lot of people that write papers within the context of a research project should have dissemination money allocated for disseminating the paper. So when you start the project, just put aside, I don't know, maybe £2,000, whatever it is, for dissemination, which includes paying an open access fee if needed be.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of chip in with that, open access is becoming more and more important in publishing, not just in journal publishing, but increasingly in book publishing as well. We're seeing a lot of authors working with funding organizations to actually mandate that the book that they're working on through the funding organization, or the chapter that they're working on, has to be published open access. So yeah, like I say, we're seeing increasing numbers of requests for this. And we've developed a kind of pricing structure to enable authors to pay for either the entire book or individual chapters to be made available OA. And certainly we share open access books through our kind of online content platform, and anyone, not just those who subscribe to the platform, can log on to these kind of open access publications and download individual chapters as PDFs or download the entire manuscript free of charge. And yeah, I mean, open access publications do inevitably get better read and cited than non-open access publications. So that is definitely something to consider. But the opposite end of that is, as Raimundo says, it is expensive. So that is it's a balancing act, but it is something that we're seeing becoming more and more prominent.
If I may follow up on this point, and then I'll come to the question that was being asked in the chat box. Just bear with me for a moment, but I just briefly want to follow up on the issue of the fee and the open access. Now, we know that open access is becoming more important. However, being an early career researcher doesn't always mean that we have the nice funds available either. What would you, do you have any recommendations for early career researchers on where to potentially reach out, or how they can go around these fees, because this might restrict the ability of some to also consider publication or even open access for that matter?
That's a tough one. That's a very tough one. As I said, it would be better if when you start your research project, you either allocate some money for dissemination if the project is being financed, and it usually happens with a PhD student coming out of the university, that the university has some money for dissemination, and it can be allocated. There are, in my understanding, there are some organizations that would support either partially or totally the fee for open access. But in the MENA region, a lot of people do not have any chance of getting money for that. And at the Middle East Development Journal, we've been considering to make the whole journal open access. But it's very expensive. And for us, it's a one-way street. When you open the journal to open access, you can't go back. It's too complicated. So it's a long-term decision, which is expensive, very expensive for us to do. And we would require funding for a number of years because you can't go back in practice. Certainly you can do it, but it's going to be a mess, right? So open access being more important, plan to have some money for that. If you don't, approach people that would, if your paper is good and it's being accepted in a journal already, that will pay for the fee because the paper is relevant and it's already accepted. If not, try to commit your university or your employer or whoever it is to put some money for it. And if not, if nothing works, then there are two alternatives. One is that you already have the paper as a working paper, so it's being disseminated for free initially, not through the journal or through the publishing house. And the second one, choose a journal that is open access because the policy of the journal is being open access and the journal is covering the fee. That will increase your visibility for your research, that will increase the citations of your paper. Now, open access is very popular and is increasingly important, but we all know that the papers being published in a journal were already in working paper form somewhere else, right? So you don't get the final version, but you get a proxy for the final version. So don't feel discouraged by the fact that you cannot pay the open fee, the open access fee. As a matter of fact, most of the research I've done was published not in open access form, and it works. I get some respectable number of citations a year for the stuff that I've issued.
Yeah, I don't think I could have summarized that better myself. Certainly, we found with people making open access requests for our titles that the most common funding sources do actually tend to be individuals, institutions. Naturally, some universities will be more happy to support this than others. But I think in the first instance, that is always where I would look for. And then there are organisations that do back this. I think the Wellcome Trust in the UK is one such organisation that is very pro open access and would fund research to support that sort of things. And yeah, I mean, some kind of quick online research should be able to highlight all sorts of organisations that can back this sort of things. I mean, I do think most of them are based in Europe, perhaps inevitably, which would be could be a problem for kind of MENA researchers, but that would certainly be where I would look for something like this.
Okay, no, perfect. Thank you for following up, and also for the various pathways and how we can tackle that. Now, there is also a question again in the chat box. Can you tell us about the number of pages relevant for any book? He specifies in his case he reached 80 pages, and he doesn't want to be redundant in terms of the content of the book. Now, to make it a bit more broader, I would like to ask, okay, what's the average length of a book, and what would be the average length of a journal article? Particularly, as you mentioned earlier, well, we always tend to ask them to cut things because they over-explain.
Yeah, for the journal article, I would say that 20 pages, space and a half, everything in it is good. Anything that goes beyond 25 pages, it tends to get boring. Okay, and the people would like to go through the paper as quick as possible. Now, these are articles for the journal. This is not the Bible. Okay, so we are trying to contribute marginally to our knowledge and not to change the world, right? So identify your contribution, and that can be done in 20 pages. Some papers, for example, a survey of the literature on something, could go over the 25 pages limit, but it must not be very long. That's what the so consider, for example, the size of the match. Each issue of a match is around 250 pages, and you have nine articles in it, plus all the cover and the editor's word or whatever you had, the preface, whatever you have in these journals. So it must be around 22 pages, printed pages per article, no more than that, with the references and the tables and the diagrams and the graphs and everything in it, and the acknowledgements for whoever is funding this. So think about that, 20 to 25 pages, that's it.
Yeah, I would say for books, we do have a couple of series that are shorter than 200 pages, but generally ours do tend to start at around 200 pages. Naturally, monographs come in all shapes and sizes, but for the majority of our series, I would say they tend to be in the region of 200 to 300 pages. I mean, we've published plenty of longer titles in the past, but for a first book, I would usually recommend somewhere in that range. I think that's nice, relatively concise. Obviously, not concise compared to a journal article, but I think, yeah, that's a good sort of ballpark to aim for a first book.
Okay, no, perfect. Thank you for clarifying. I'm trying to think. Do you, and also just with an eye on the time, because we're nearing the end of our session today, and as I don't see any additional questions or hands at this stage, do you have any last advice to early careers on what to consider for the publication process?
One minor issue on the writing of the paper: don't write things that will get obsolete too quick. Okay, because, and this is as important for journals as it is for books. By the time the publishing process is done, a lot of things will be obsolete. So in reviewing a paper, I would also suggest the author, look, this section is too easy to figure out that 6 months down the road or 1 year down the road, everything that you're saying here is obsolete. So try to speak and write as if the paper would have to stand a long time, okay? And that is an additional, I think it's far more important for books than for journals, but I think it applies to both, that you have to write a thing that would have to withstand time, okay? And therefore, topics that are too narrow tend to get obsolete faster, right? So if you write a book on COVID, and I know it myself because I have a couple of papers in books, either you publish it very fast, or it's going to be obsolete by the time it goes out. It's going to be COVID history, not COVID research, right? So be very careful with that, because obsolescence is important when considering a long publishing period.
Yeah, that's very true. I think we like all of our books to be relevant for at least 4 to 5 years after publication. So I would certainly keep that in mind as and when you're developing an idea. COVID's a very good example of a topic that's so fast moving that it will be quite tricky to capture in book form. In terms of kind of general advice, I would encourage authors to just put as much detail as possible into any book proposals that they may ever work on. You want to give the publisher as much information as possible to make a decision on whether to publish or not. And I would really emphasize doing your research both on the existing book market in the area and on the existing publishers in the area, because another key reason for why a publisher might reject a book proposal is simply that they might have published 3 or 4 books on the same topic in the last year, and they don't feel that a new one will add value. So that's very important. Definitely pay a lot of attention to what's already out there. I mean, on our publishing form, we've actually got a little section where authors can note recent titles that they think might overlap with what they're working on. So yeah, it's all about kind of doing research, building the groundwork, and then so that so as a publisher, if we've got as much information as possible, we can make a decision. We can decide, yes, we do want to publish this, and then hopefully from that point, the writing process would be as kind of smooth and seamless as it can be.
Okay, no, perfect. Thank you both so much for all the information and all the insight that you've given and from your expertise. I would like to thank Raimundo and Daniel for being with us today, and I would like to thank the audience for their questions as well. Thank you both so much for today's session, and I hope that this also provides many of us with some guidelines and insights on how we can best go around the publication process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.